All right. Hello out there, and welcome to the Cotton Companion Podcast. This is Beck Barnes and Jim Steadman here of Cotton Grower, and we are coming to you from the the brand new world famous virtual Cotton Companion Studios, also known as the rooms in our respective houses that our wives have banished us to while we are working from home. Despite all of those disruptions around us, we are producing a podcast. We're full steam ahead here at Cotton Grower. And on top of that, it's been a beautiful past few springtime days here in Memphis. No rainfall for the past several days. That's the first time we could say that in what feels like 100 years. And I know, speaking for me, I got a bunch of honeydew yard work stuff done over the weekend now that I'm at the home office. And I suspect my partner in crime, Mr. Jim Steadman, did as well. What do you think? Howdy, Jim.
Hey, Beck. And yes, there was quite a bit of yard work going on yesterday, but it's good to have everything squared away and moving ahead. And I guess we could call this the Cotton Companion Extreme Home Edition.
Extreme Home, you're right. Cotton Companion Home Makeover, Home Takeover.
Yes,
maybe.
There we go.
So, yeah, you're right. And as we mentioned here, we are both at home for the foreseeable future and enjoying these warmer temps. We know that y'all are enjoying those warmer temps as well. Warmer temperatures mean warmer ground temperatures. And that means if I know y'all, you are getting that itchy trigger finger to start thinking about putting some seeds in the ground. You probably are already putting other crops in the ground, but you're starting to think about those cotton seeds here in the coming weeks. And I don't know about y'all, but for me, man, I love that feeling of optimism and hope in the springtime, and that feeling that planting season brings us, even in the middle of this kind of hectic, disruptive days, these circumstances that we're living in. Planting season puts some optimism in the air for me. So anyhow, we got a great episode coming up for y'all today. The first thing we want to do is to bring you a short message from our sponsor, the fine folks with Enlist.
This episode of Cotton Companion is brought to you by the Enlist Weed Control System, ready to help you control tough weeds with 2,4-D featuring inherent low volatility.
Okay, and we appreciate our sponsors today, the aforementioned Enlist, as well as the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. That's a program from Cotton Incorporated. For now, as we always do, we are going to follow that Enlist ad up with our own custom content segment featuring our own custom content editor, Robin Sickberg, and she recently sat down and spoke with Shauna Hubbard, a traits herbicide product manager at Corteva. We're going to bring you that custom interview segment right now.
Hello, I'm Robin Sickberg, custom content editor with Meister Media Worldwide, publisher of Cotton Grower magazine. My guest today is Shauna Hubbard, Traits Herbicide Product Manager for Corteva Agriscience. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
As the season is getting underway, what kinds of weed pressure are cotton farmers facing today?
Well, we've had a trend of growing resistance with weeds for quite some time now, and we do see that continuing. We've got some especially tough species in the pigweed family with Palmer amaranth, and even seen challenges with other weeds in the cotton belt as well, kochia being a tough one over in Oklahoma and the Texas region and up into Kansas. So a variety of challenges for farmers as that resistance continues to develop, and folks are re-looking at their plans for management with new technologies as well as mechanical methods and good agronomic practices as well.
What results are farmers seeing after applying Enlist herbicides?
For folks who are using Enlist cotton from the Phytogen brand and using Enlist herbicides in those fields, we are seeing good results for control of those resistant weeds. Even the tough pigweed species, as we've used an integrated weed management plan that involves starting clean and utilizing those pre-emergence herbicides and then coming in timely with an Enlist herbicide, we are seeing good results there. 2,4-D in Enlist herbicides has a lot of power on those tough and resistant broadleaves, including our pigweed species. So good results thus far, but really want to keep emphasizing that folks use that integrated weed management approach, using a program with multiple sites of action.
So, Shauna, where can farmers get more information on Enlist cotton?
For those who are using the Enlist system, enlist.com is a great resource to check out for more about how to use the traits, how to spray the herbicides, and we are hosting a live webinar on Tuesday, April 21st, that is open to anybody if they want to learn more about spraying Enlist, specifically in the cotton belt. We'll talk about field planning and many different considerations there for those of us in the cotton belt.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure that, farmers are going to really need that resource as they move forward. Appreciate your time, Shauna.
Thanks, Robin.
All right, so a big thank you to Robin and to Shauna and to Enlist. With that, we're going to get the ball rolling on the 69th episode of the Cotton Companion. And man, we got a lot to get into today. It has been seems like the past month has been, big news items almost every day. And it's no different in the world of cotton. Jim is going to lead us in our news segment where topics will include, but are not limited to, a surprising USDA acreage projection that came out last week amidst all the other wild news headlines flying back and forth. We got that acreage projection. We're also going to he also brought us on our website, Jim did a story that really thoroughly broke down the CARES Act that was passed as kind of a recovery stimulus bill by the federal government in response to this economic disruptions of the COVID-19 virus. And so Jim did a really good job of kind of breaking down what that meant for agriculture. And he's going to get into that in that news segment too. Before we dive into that news, though, the formal news segment, we did get a reader question last week. I had put out a call for reader questions, things that you guys might be having anxiety about in the middle of all this stuff. And sure enough, we got a good email into my own inbox that day. And I want to read that to y'all now. I'm not going to tell you the name of the sender because, frankly, I forgot to ask him permission to use his name, and I don't want to get myself in trouble there. But I know he had a question that many of y'all are asking. And so anyhow, I'll read you verbatim his email that he sent me right now. He says, my question is concerning the stimulus bill that was recently passed. Now, granted, he sent this on March 27. And this was before a couple pieces of that bill were passed. So just keep that piece of context in mind. He says, my question is concerning the stimulus bill that was recently passed. I understand there will be small business loans available to cover salaries for employees and are forgivable if used all and solely for salaries. So will these small business loans be available for farmers to cover the cost of employee salaries? I know from experience that farmers are often not seen as small businesses, even though we are small businesses. So that was a great question. We immediately kind of went about trying to come up with, an appropriate answer to that thing. It's a tricky question because things are moving so quickly. And the guy who asked that question sort of presciently included that last line about how, well, sometimes farms aren't defined as small businesses, even though they are 100% small businesses. We all know that, but the outside world doesn't see farming as that. And sure enough, in researching this thing, I came across this great story that was put together by the Farm Bureau. I believe it was written by a lady named Veronica Nye. She's an economist with the Farm Bureau. And they were researching this exact question after the Paycheck Protection Loan Act was passed late last week. And it was the question of, well, is this going to be available for farmers? And they were hung up. In fact, the Farm Bureau put out their first reading of this bill that was passed. They wrote a long piece that they posted on their website that said they didn't think that farmers were going to be able to access these paycheck protection loan funds because of this loose definition, or this rather tight definition of what a small business is. Well, lo and behold, on Friday, April 3rd, they did an update about their understanding of this bill. And I'm going to read you verbatim what that update was. They said, yesterday morning, we posted an article titled Farmers' Use of Paycheck Protection Loan Depends on Small Business Definition, questioning whether the Small Business Administration's industry-level standards pertaining to revenues would be enforced, ultimately excluding thousands of agricultural producers from getting Paycheck Protection Program loans. Yesterday evening, SBA released the Paycheck Protection Program interim final rule, and based on our analysis of the interim final rule, we are pleased to confirm that the IFR removes the industry-specific revenue thresholds. Agriculture enterprises that employ 500 or fewer people whose principal place of residence is the United States are in fact eligible, regardless of revenue levels. So that was a long way of saying, yes, farmers are going to be able to have access to the Paycheck Protection Program loans. In a nutshell, the PPPL is designed to help small businesses, I'm reading from the story again, keep their employees paid through this difficult period. The PPPL provides $349 billion in forgivable loans to small businesses to pay employees and keep them on the payroll. These loans are open to most businesses under 500 employees, including nonprofits, the self-employed, startups, and cooperatives. I'm not going to read y'all the entire article there. You can find that story on farmbureau.com. I will read you a couple of key paragraphs, though, quoting again from the story. The real highlight of the PPPL, however, is that the portion of the loan that covers eligible expenses within an 8-week period from February 15, 2020 to June 30, 2020 is forgivable, as long as the company maintains staff and payroll. Any loan proceeds in excess of this amount are subject to repayment at a rate of 1%. The maximum duration of the PPPL loan is 2 years. So this is all good news, to be sure. Looks like you guys are going to get some help keeping, those farm hands and labor you got on the farm employed. This bill, according to Farm Bureau, is intended to keep small business employees on the payroll. The PPPL will likely be an important lifeline for many, including independent contractors and the self-employed, aka you guys, who will benefit from the program's expanded eligibility. An important reminder, funds from this program will be available on a first come, first served basis. So you guys need to be talking to your bankers about that right now. In fact, I believe there's some links on that Farm Bureau piece to how you can get started applying for these loans. So that was a great question. The answer to the question is yes, you guys are eligible for PPPL payroll relief. Start looking into it right now, is our advice. That's the official cotton grower advice, right, Jim?
That's exactly it, Beck. You summarized it beautifully.
Yeah, I tried to go as quickly as I can there because we got a lot to get to. And to be sure, Jim has a great interview lined up later in the podcast with Mr. Steve Verett of Plains Cotton Growers, Inc. And I believe they touch on this a little bit there too, so stay tuned for that. Okay, Jim. Now that I've probably stepped on all over toes of things you're going to get to here in the news segment, we're going to get to that news of the day right after we hear from our sponsor, the fine folks at Cotton Incorporated, to tell us about the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol.
It's time for U.S. cotton producers to come together as a community through the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. When you enroll in the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, you'll help strengthen U.S. cotton's position in the global marketplace through our collective efforts. With the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, we can lead the charge and create the sustainable cotton the U.S. deserves. Enroll now at trustuscotton.org. That's trustuscotton.org. The U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. Are you in?
Okay, again, a huge shout out to our friends at Cotton Incorporated. They do so much heavy lifting on behalf of our industry, and that U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, another great example of everything they do for building demand for our crop. So we're proud to have them as a sponsor. Now, Jim, without further ado, please hit us with the news of the day, sir.
I will be happy to. And as Beck said, here in the past week and a half, certainly since our last podcast, a lot of things have been happening in the market. And we're going to start with the sort of, believe it or not, USDA prospective plantings report, which projected 13.7 million cotton acres for this year, which really and truly kind of came as a shock to a lot of people in the industry, and not as too much of a shock to a lot of others, as I've discovered in the past week or so. So basically, according to the report, U.S. cotton acres are estimated, like I said, at 13.7 million acres. That's down less than 1% from last year. That's counting 13.5 million acres of upland and about 228,000 acres of Pima. Now, across the Cotton Belt, most of the states did show decreases. Some of those, well, they range basically from 2% to 18%, with only 6 states, and that would be Florida, Kansas, Missouri, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas, projected to show some very small percentage increases in cotton acres. Now, again, to help put these numbers into context, you have to recall that growers were surveyed by the National Agricultural Statistics Service during the first 2 weeks of March, just prior to this broad-scale public health and business restrictions put in place due to the coronavirus. Now, to say the market wasn't a big fan of the report would kind of be an understatement. With prices climbed slightly higher in anticipation of the report, everyone expecting fewer acres, and then dropped back into the to the high 40s shortly after USDA's numbers came out. So really and truly, regardless of who you talk to about it, whether they're realistic or not, whether people believe them or not, it's going to be a true wait and see situation on this. And we'll certainly have the final picture as planting commences on a larger scale. We know South Texas is pretty much already in the field. But as things start in the Southeast and the Mid-South and other parts of the and coastal Texas, we'll have a much better picture once USDA's planted acres report comes out at the end of June.
Yeah, just to jump in, boy, my jaw hit the floor when I saw that 13.7 million acreage projection come out, and you do a good job contextualizing of, they really did that survey before the news is moving so quickly. It feels like the past 2 weeks occurred over, the last 3 months, but you know what I'm saying? They conducted this survey before a lot of this heavy news came out over the past couple of weeks.
Realistically, prices were in, the 65 to 70 cent range
Yeah.
at that point. So,
right.
There was a certain amount of optimism in the market.
Right. And I know better than anybody, it's difficult coming up with a acreage projection. But yeah, the folks that I had spoken to on the ground, anecdotally, these are anecdotes, and the plural of anecdote is never data, it's just anecdotes. But friends of mine have been telling me for the past couple of weeks, man, we're thinking about moving out of cotton, and most of my folks are in the Mid-South, and we're going to move out of cotton. We're going to move, may do some corn acres, but that corn window is as wet as it's been, is closing in a hurry. So people were looking at beans. And then this number came out. I was expecting this number to be close to 10 million. Not in 1,000 years would I have guessed they were going to go up from earlier projections. So, it's a difficult thing to project, but man, it sure came as a curveball to most, including myself.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's willing to, to stick their neck out and put a precise number on it at this point.
Sure.
But some of the folks that I've talked to in the last week will not be surprised if we're anything below 12 million acres would probably be closer to reality at this point.
Yeah.
All right, moving ahead, we're going to circle back around to the CARES Act that Beck talked about earlier in the podcast. It was signed on March 27th. I think the signatures on this approval came shortly after you got your message from your from our listener. And as part of that CARES Act, there were several supplemental appropriations for U.S. farmers and ranchers that were put in place, and they provide several options for growers to explore to help them get through the COVID-19 situation. USDA, as part of the package, received $49 billion, and that included $9.5 billion to support agricultural producers, including livestock and specialty crop producers, to respond to COVID-19 losses, another $14 billion to restore funding to the Commodity Credit Corporation, and to increase the borrowing authority of USDA to support agriculture in times of crisis. Now, again, keep in mind, the past 2 years of market facilitation program payments and funding have come through the Commodity Credit Corporation, or the CCC. And also, the Secretary of Agriculture was given authority through the end of September of this year to extend terms of marketing assistance loans to 12 months from the current 9 months. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail again about the Paycheck Protection Act, because I think you've already covered that pretty well. And our discussion with Steve Verett coming up is going to get into a little bit more detail from a localized level. But as you would expect in all of this legislation, the National Cotton Council and several other organizations work closely with AG's allies in Congress to put this aid package together. They also worked with USDA and other federal agencies to provide relief on the H-2A visa processing to ensure that guest workers can get to the employers in a timely manner as spring planting begins. And they were also involved in continuing activities with agencies that regulate transportation, particularly the trucking sector, to help provide some relief on hours of service, weight limit exemptions, and CDL extensions and waivers. All of those things very, very important to agriculture and to the movement of goods across the country. Our next bit of news, Texas has a brand new statewide extension cotton specialist. His name is Dr. Ben McKnight, and he will be based in College Station. He is a native Texan. He worked for both Texas A&M AgriLife Research and AgriLife Extension while he earned his degrees at Texas A&M, and has spent the last few years working as a weed scientist with LSU while earning his doctorate there. Now, during his postdoctoral research and as a research associate at LSU, he's conducted rice field trials at research and grower locations, although most of his background has been in cotton. Now, after the announcement was made last week, Dr. McKnight said that accepting this position is a homecoming for me, obviously. As a Texas native, I'm very familiar with the passion that our growers and industry have for cotton production. And from his standpoint, from a field research standpoint, his plans to continue evaluating, obviously, many different research topics of interest to cotton production in the state. In addition to variety testing and evaluation, some of the applied research efforts of his team are going to involve evaluating fertility programs across the state, ways to control volunteer cotton plants and stalk destruction, just to name a few things. And several of these research topics will be collaborative efforts with many other researchers, with AgriLife Extension specialists and county agents. So welcome back to Texas, Dr. McKnight. You've got a lot of work to do here, and I'm sure it's a little challenging walking into a position like this with the restrictions that are put in place. But I'm sure he's going to do just fine.
6 million some odd cotton acres any given year, and what a year to be stepping into that. So
yeah, no kidding.
I'm sure he's up to it though. Good luck and and all the best to Ben McKnight for sure.
I'm sure. And then finally, one last thing I did want to talk about. Our friends at Cotton Incorporated did a consumer survey back here as of March 20th, as a matter of fact, to sort of better understand the effects of the pandemic on consumer habits and attitudes. So they posed a series of questions to 500 U.S. consumers through an online survey. And those results showed that 66% of consumers say they are, quote, very afraid these days. That shouldn't come as any surprise. Personal concern increased with age, with 56% of consumers 45 years and older saying they're very concerned with the current pandemic, 40% among 25 to 44-year-olds, and 18% from 14 to 24-year-olds. Now, according to the survey responses, 35.8, almost 36% of consumers are spending more or significantly more money than they were before the crisis. About 30% say they're spending about the same amount of money, and slightly more than 1/3 of respondents claim to be spending less. And as far as online shopping is concerned, 46% said their online shopping was about the same. 32% said they were shopping more online, and about 14.5% said they were shopping less. Now, those responses also revealed that more money is being allocated to groceries. It's about 57%. About 48% for household supplies, such as toilet paper and cleaning supplies, should you be able to find them. About 26% for online services, and another 26% for local food delivery services, which are sort of a real lifesaver for a lot of people in the situation today. But the biggest factor that came out of this research is that comfort is playing a bigger role in daily life right now. 71% of consumers say they're watching more television. 67% say they're consuming more news. Almost 63% claim they're wearing comfortable clothes more often. And about 52% say they're eating more comfort food or snacks. I'm going to be real curious to see what the national average on individual weight looks like by the time we all come out of hiding here.
I'm about 6 pounds into my COVID-19. I got COVID-13 left to get before I reach the target there.
But the important part of this study is when asked to identify fibers and fabrics selected for comfortable apparel, that cotton ranked the highest, almost 70% of respondents, which was far and away ahead of spandex, polyester, wool, and other fabrics. So in times of trial and people looking for comfort, man, they want to be surrounded by cotton. And that was probably the best news to come out of that little bit of research. And hopefully that's a little reassuring to the folks who are getting ready to go put cotton in the ground this year, that yes, they're, consumers love it.
Yeah.
And, we just need to get more out there and need to get the markets back moving.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's the news.
Okay, good deal, Jim. Appreciate you there. We are going to pump the brakes on our news segment there because we want to bring the folks this interview that you conducted with our old friend, Mr. Steve Verett, Plain Cotton Growers, Inc. Steve is of course, lifelong farmer and advocate for our industry. And he's a previous winner of the Cotton Grower Cotton Achievement Award. And anyhow, been a longtime friend of our magazine, a longtime friend of cotton farmers across the country. And from his position at PCG, he has really been on top of the developing government response to the COVID-19 outbreak. And so I believe that was the impetus for Jim ringing him up this past week and kind of picking his brain in this podcast interview. Is that correct, Jim? Was that where y'all's focus was?
That's one of the primary things we focused on. But I think the other factor in all this too is, I did this interview last Friday. So it'd been April 3rd, which was the day that Plains Cotton Grower was scheduled to have their annual meeting. So as Steve and I were discussing, we were going to do this interview anyway. We were planning to do it face to face.
Yeah.
So, he had time on his hands Friday from not having the meeting. But yeah, we talked about what growers need to do and kind of the impact that they're starting to see at the ground level in rural areas from the COVID-19. But we also talked about a couple other things, including Steve's thoughts on the CARES Act and what where the real advantages are for growers. And then kind of got his thoughts a little bit on the prospective planting report as well. So it was a good visit with Steve. Every visit with Steve's good. I think the listeners will really enjoy to hear what he has to say.
Okay, good deal, Jim. So without further ado, then we bring you Steve Verett of Plains Cotton Growers, Inc.
Welcome to this episode's market segment. A few weeks ago, terms like social distancing and shelter in place and distance learning just weren't part of our normal conversations. But today, a lot of state and local edicts are in place to protect us all and try to lessen the impact of the coronavirus. But in spite of that, farming goes on. And today, we're going to discuss some of the impact of COVID-19 with Steve Verett, who's Chief Executive Officer of Plains Cotton Growers, based in Lubbock. Steve, thanks for joining us again today.
It's good to be with you, Jim, even under these crazy circumstances.
Absolutely. Well, as we're recording this, as you recall, we're supposed to be face-to-face today at the Plains Cotton Growers annual meeting, which became an early cancellation due to the COVID-19. How are your growers, and you too as a grower, how are you managing and preparing for another crop season in the midst of all of this craziness?
Well, I would say that the growers, for the most part, are going about their business pretty much as usual. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been a few inconveniences, but as you know, Jim, and your listeners know, it's pretty easy to social distance if you're out on the farm in most cases. But, we have had to remind folks as well that, being in a essential business, that we have to understand that we still need to abide by the social distancing, the washing your hands, planting has already started, and I know that they're trying at least to get some corn planted in the Mid-South and the Southeast, and facing some challenges there. But from a coronavirus perspective, for the most part, it's going on business as usual. But some of our businesses that we deal with, our retailers, our distributors, they're having to do things a little bit differently, maybe limiting the people in their office, making when you come up, they load things for you and have as little social contact as possible. But out on the farm, it's pretty much business as usual.
Yeah, I made a few phone calls earlier this week trying to get a feel for what was going on in the supply chain and down at the retail level. And that's pretty much what I was hearing, from seed companies basically saying we're shipping seed and growers are still able to get it. There haven't been too many hang-ups and things. And, we'll just kind of see with the new rules and regulations in place as you move farther into the season and other products and other commodities are needed on the farm, exactly how everything's going to work out.
Yeah, and that's right. And I say what I say because at least in most of the rural areas, even here and around Lubbock, we've had I think nearly 100 cases in Lubbock County, and a few of the surrounding counties right around Lubbock have had a few cases. But for the most part, when you move out one or two counties from Lubbock, there are no confirmed cases. Now, that doesn't mean there's not people in those areas that might be carrying the virus, but certainly it hasn't been confirmed at this point. But, it can continue to be business as usual as long as we recognize that we have to abide by the rules, and we have to try to make sure we do everything we can to social distance and try to not spread into the parts out on the farm or with our employees or any of that. So I think we're all going about our business, but we're doing it with our fingers crossed and being cautious as well.
Sure. Now, I think last Friday, March 27th, the president signed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or what's known now as the CARES Act. And there was sort of a long list of economic relief and other options for individuals, businesses, and industries in that. Part of that, USDA, as I understand, received like $49 billion in that package. What can growers expect from this act, and how can they take advantage of some of these programs?
Well, a lot of that's yet to be determined. We know that, directly for farmers, there was an addition of $14 billion to the CCC account authorization for them to use that much like they've done for several years in the past on assistance programs. And then there was $9.6 billion, I believe it was, specifically not through CCC, but just a specific appropriation to USDA for a program for livestock and specialty crops.
Yes.
And certainly right now, when you look at the industries that are most affected and maybe having some of the toughest time right now, is both the cattle industry from where cattle prices are, and then when you look at the dairy industry, I saw this week where there's dairy producers having to dump milk because there's just no place to go with it.
Yep.
Some of the processing plants have shut down. The demand has fallen off because whether it's schools being closed or hotels being closed, the demand has just fallen completely off a cliff. So, those are critical industries that, when you have a dairy, you don't just quit feeding cows.
No.
It's very difficult to shut down. So I think that'll be some of the first things that we'll see probably come out of USDA is to try to address some of those that are most pressing. What might be available to the program crops or the row crop producers, I think is still pretty much up in the air at this point in time. I think USDA is starting to mull some of those programs over, but it may be a little while before we know anything on that.
Mm-hmm.
But specifically today, we do know about this kind of a new program, this payroll protection program.
I was going to ask you about that. I'm glad you jumped into that.
There was some discussion early on. A lot of folks were saying didn't think agriculture was going to be eligible for that, but that's been cleared up. And I just say most definitely farming operations operations are eligible for that. And it's to put it simply, it's basically a program there to make sure people keep their employees on the payroll and keep working.
Right.
And the simplest way to describe it is, if you look at what your total payroll is for the year, and you can even look at what your total payroll was for 19, divide that by 12, and then 2.5 times that is the amount that you're eligible for a loan. And it's an SBA 100% guaranteed loan that will be all administered through your local banks. That's where you will go to apply, the local banks. And I know a lot of them, if they're not already approved to be SBA cooperators or lenders, I think many banks are looking at that. The guidance just come out on that late last night, so most of the banks are working through that. But I think it could be a good opportunity to have a little help with a little cash flow in all the operations, whether you're farmers or small business or whatever. But I just encourage producers, they are eligible, and to be visiting with their banks, or SBA's got a bunch of stuff online that you can look at and to see about the eligibility. One thing I would add that, once you calculate that and you get that loan, there is an option for loan forgiveness for that amount of money. But in order to be forgiven of that loan, within 8 weeks after the initiation of the loan, you have to show that you paid that money out, that amount of that loan, for payroll, rent, utilities, and mortgage interest. And only 25% can be non-payroll. But as long as you pay that money out within 8 weeks of the loan, and either 75% of it has to go to payroll, of course 100% could, but at least 75%, then that loan will be forgiven by SBA, or through your bank it'll be forgiven, but guaranteed by SBA.
That's great, and I hope a lot of producers take advantage of that as they move into this season, because I know we were starting to get some comments from some of our readers that were asking, are we eligible for this or not? And we were able to, same thing, find out that yes, they were, and try to get that word out. So I appreciate all your comments on that as well. Finally, I just want to talk to you briefly. USDA released its prospective plantings report on March 31st, showing a projection of 13.7 million cotton acres in the U.S. this season, including a little bit of acreage increase for Texas over last year. Any thoughts or reactions you may have heard about that report?
Well, I think the report pretty much took everybody by surprise. I don't think anybody was expecting acreage to go up that much. I mean, for most of the projections, I think the Cotton Council projection, or their survey, was 13.2 million acres. And I just think since that time, prices have declined significantly. And so I just think there was a lot of a bit of a surprise. I would say here on the high plains of Texas, we planted like 4.3 million acres in 2019. I've been telling everybody that it will be less than that, and I'll be surprised if we get to 4 million acres. One of the things we always talk about here is that, if anybody's going to stick with cotton, it's usually folks in this area, and that's because it's the highest and best use for a lot of our farms, especially in our non-irrigated areas, the dryland areas. But one of the things that I think could drive this even more for maybe less acres, in addition to the price, is a lot of wheat was planted behind cotton after the crop was harvested last year.
Okay.
And because of the moisture that we've had pretty significant moisture over the winter. The wheat right now looks as good as I've ever seen it. And I hear a lot of people talking about the possibility of just carrying that to harvest, especially wheat prices have been up some over the last month or so, carrying that to harvest. And if they do that, that's going to take land out of, more than likely out of cotton, because you're not going to harvest that wheat until probably the earliest would be mid-June. And by the time, some even into July, that's getting too late to plant cotton behind the wheat. They might look at planting a sorghum possibly, which, the prices have increased some on as well. And quite honestly, it's just, farmers are looking at ways to cut costs. And if you're going to plant a crop, a sorghum crop, can be planted for cheaper. Plus,
Sure. And as always, we'll have that final picture at the end of June when the acres planted report comes out.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, if we wait long enough, we'll know what it is.
Exactly. Like I told somebody, it's going to be what it's going to be. But
that's exactly right.
Anyway.
And I would say, I told somebody this the other day. I think those decisions will be made right up to the time you're pouring the seed in the box.
I think so too.
And like I talk about on this wheat stuff, a lot can happen with that wheat crop from now to the end. If it doesn't, if it turns off hot and dry, which we've had some real warm weather this week, until today, there is a chance of rain this weekend. So that's why it's just a real fluid thing right now. But given where prices are, especially on cotton and not much on the horizon, I just think the acres could be a good bit less than what we'd hoped for.
Okay, great. Steve, we're going to wrap up at this point. And again, I want to thank you for joining us. Your perspective in these interesting times is always valuable to us.
Well, appreciate it, Jim, and I'm sorry, we're missing that annual meeting today. Usually by this time of day on Friday of our annual meeting, I'm getting more relaxed because the meeting's over, and we've got another one behind us, so it's really been strange this week. I was thinking about that. I've been spending some time at the farm since we're working a little more remotely. I'm in the office today, but anyway, appreciate you calling and giving me the opportunity, and we look forward to when we can get together again.
Great, sounds good. Now, back to the rest of this Cotton Companion.
So, okay, Jim, a big thanks to you and a big thanks to Steve Verett and Plains Cotton Growers. They are always doing their part to support our industry, not only out there on the plains, but, him agreeing to do this interview with us, sharing that knowledge for the benefit of farmers across the country. He is a great friend of cotton, and we appreciate him and Plains Cotton Growers, Inc. So we're going to hear a brief message from our sponsor, Enlist. Then I'm going to be back to get you all out of here.
As cotton is emerging and growing, cotton farmers are preparing for their annual battle against weeds. And the weeds keep getting tougher. Phytogen cottonseed with the Enlist trait is helping control those tough weeds. Farmers who've planted Phytogen W3FE varieties are making Enlist herbicides the cornerstone of their weed control program. After making pre-emergence treatments featuring residual herbicides, they're taking advantage of the convenience and flexibility of Enlist herbicides post-emergence. These herbicides offer a wider application window with no cutoff dates, days after planting restrictions, or time of day spray restrictions for application on Enlist crops. Learn more about the Enlist system by joining one of our webinars, led by an Enlist field specialist, to find out how you can maximize success with this Enlist technology. Visit enlist.com for registration information.
So, okay, that will just about do it for this installment of the Cotton Companion podcast. We want to thank Enlist and Cotton Incorporated for sponsoring us this year. Of course, Cotton Incorporated with the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol Program. And we want to thank you, dear listeners, sincerely for joining us. If you like what you're hearing, by all means, tell your buddies about us. And they can get to our podcast in 3 very easy ways. The first is going to cottongrower.com/companion. The second is to subscribe to our channel on iTunes or wherever it may be that people are finding your podcast these days. And the third way, the best way, sign up for our weekly e-newsletter. That's the Cotton Grower e-news. You can do that by going to www.cottongrower.com/subscribe. So also, please make sure you're following us on social media. We are at Cotton Grower Mag on Twitter. And on Facebook, you can find us by simply searching for Cotton Grower Magazine. We hope that you are enjoying our latest issue, which I believe at this point is still the March issue, although that April issue should be hitting your mailboxes any day now. This podcast is produced by Mr. Tyler Hatch. He works at the mothership, Meister Media Worldwide, in beautiful Willoughby, Ohio. My name is Beck Barnes, and I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for the next episode of the Cotton Companion. For now, on behalf of my own Cotton Companion, Mr. Jim Steadman, we wish you and your farm all the best.
Yeah, he works and he works and he works and he works and he works all day. God made a farm.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Cotton Companion. Visit Enlist.com to learn more about the Enlist weed control system and to hear from farmers experiencing the technology.